Today I'm going to tell you a story so quietly dangerous it can make a whole town hold its breath, set in the heart of the American Old West, where dust hangs heavy and justice is always for sale. It's a place where broken laws and broken lives cross paths, and where one wrong step can cost everything. It all began with something small, a simple accusation, but it was enough to turn an entire town against a widow who refused to bow. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The air inside the rust-hollow courthouse felt thin and lifeless, dry as old paper left too long in the sun. Light spilled through warped glass panes, slicing the room into long bands of gold, as if the building itself had already passed judgment. At the center of the floor stood Clara Hale, her back straight despite the worn seams of her dress and the sheen of sweat along her temples. Her eyes, cool gray, unyielding, met the bench without wavering. She had not spoken since the hearing began. Above her, Judge Amos Reed leaned forward, dragging a finger through the edge of his beard with a bored, familiar motion. It was the look of a man who had decided the outcome before the first word was spoken. To his right, Silas Crow sat with his boots resting on the table, his grin deep and practiced, etched into a face shaped by sundust and entitlement. The confidence of a wealthy land baron rolled off him like heat from baked stone. Confidence rooted not in truth, but in control. "I don't see any reason to drag this out," Crow said lazily, his voice carrying across the room. "She was seen leading 2 of my horses out of my north paddock 3 nights ago. My foreman saw it. My ranch hand saw it. Even old Widow Boone saw it. Half this town would swear to it." A few heads in the courtroom dipped in agreement. None dared meet Clara's gaze. Her hands remained folded before her still, as the center of a storm yet to break. "She's a widow." Judge Crow continued, his tone softening with counterfeit sympathy. "Times are hard. She's got children to feed." "I don't blame her for that," he added smoothly. "I'm only asking the law to do what it was made to do." Judge Reed grunted and leaned closer, studying Clara the way a buyer might inspect a lame horse. "Do you have anything to say in your defense, Mrs. Hale?" The question drifted through the room, heavy and unhurried. The courtroom, packed with sunburned faces and held breath, waited. Clara parted her lips, then closed them again. She had already spoken her truth. She had told it to the sheriff, to the clerk, to anyone willing to listen. The horses had not been on Crow's land when she found them. They had been wandering unbranded, half-starved in the hills east of her claim. She had taken them in, fed them, kept them alive. It wasn't theft. It was survival. But men like Crow didn't need facts. They had guns for friends and judges. Clara lowered her eyes for a heartbeat, then lifted them back to the bench. "I have nothing more to add," she said quietly. A ripple of murmurs moved through the room. Judge Reed nodded once, already curling his fingers around the gavel. "Then I will render the courtroom doors slammed open." The sound cracked through the space, rattling shutters and nerves alike. Every head snapped around. Sheriff Tom Calder flinched. Someone gasped. The man who entered carried the weight of long miles and harder years. A weathered duster swung around his boots, thick with trail dust. His hat sat low, but not low enough to hide the scar running from his right eye down his cheek, pink and raw against sun-darkened skin. He stood tall, not with pride, but with the quiet presence of something dangerous left unchallenged too long. Like a shadow stretched across the ground at dusk, Clara felt her heart stumble, though she couldn't have said why. The stranger crossed the room without haste and stopped beside her. For a moment he said nothing, only looked at her as though weighing something unseen. Then he turned toward the bench. "She's my wife," he said. The silence that followed felt absolute. Judge Amos Reed blinked once, as if unsure his eyes were still working. Silas Crow's grin faltered, the confidence draining from his face, like color from old paint. The courtroom shifted uneasily the way cattle do when they sense a storm rolling in. "Excuse me," the judge said carefully. The man gave a single nod. "Married 5 years," he said evenly. "Arizona territory. Lost track of each other during the war." Crow shot to his feet, his voice snapping sharp as a rattler's strike. "That's a lie. She's lived here 10 years, he pressed on. Her husband was a marshal, dead and buried. The stranger's eyes slid to him, slow, measured, empty of warmth. A young deputy near the back went pale. An older man by the window whispered, "Thought he was dead." A lot of folks thought a lot of things, Wyatt Cole said. Judge Reed lowered the gavel. The handle looked suddenly too heavy in his hand. "We'll reconvene tomorrow," he muttered. "This court is adjourned." As the courtroom men poured out in a wash of whispers and sidelong glances, Clara stood rooted in place, her hand still held in his. She leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "I've never seen you before in my life." Wyatt Cole didn't smile. "I know," he said. "But they needed to believe it. And you needed a name the law still listens to." Outside, the sky bled into shades of bone and rust. Across Rust Hollow, stories were already spreading. The saloon reeked of stale whiskey and sweat and the kind of secrets that only grow heavier after sundown. Clara stepped in behind him, her boots stiff against warped floorboards. The room fell quiet again, just as it had in the courthouse. This man carried silence with him like a hood. She followed because she had no choice. The town believed they were bound now. And if she stepped away too soon, the lie might unravel before she understood why he'd told it. Wyatt Cole didn't take the bar. He chose a corner table where his back met the wall and his eyes could watch every door and window. He set his wide-brimmed hat beside him and gestured for her to sit. She stayed standing. "You're not my husband," she said flatly. "No," he agreed. "I didn't say I was. You said you needed to be." Her eyes hardened. "You don't know me." "No," he said calmly. "Then why lie?" Wyatt leaned back, resting one boot across the other knee, studying her like a man who had already weighed the cost and paid it before. His fingers circled the rim of the tin cup the barkeep had set down, slow and absent. "I've been waiting a long time for Silas Crow to finally bare his teeth," Wyatt Cole said. "You gave him the opening." Clara folded her arms across her chest. "So you've got a past with him." Wyatt let out a dry, humorless breath. "Everyone does if they stay alive out here long enough." His gaze drifted not to her, but somewhere far beyond the walls. "He killed someone I loved once, a woman named Rose Bennett. She had challenged him over stolen land, over cattle left to rot. Crow had men drag her from her house in the dead of night, claimed she fought back. And the law agreed," Clara said softly. Wyatt nodded once. "You don't look like her," he added, "but you sound like her. The same quiet, the kind that made men lean in closer." "I didn't ask for your help," Clara said. "And I didn't ask for your permission." For a moment they held each other's stare, two hard sparks striking stone without catching flame. Then Wyatt rose. Slow, unhurried, like a man already aware the room was listening. "By morning," he said, "half the county will believe you're Clara Cole, a frontier wife. That means the law can't hang you without pulling me into it. That buys time. Time, he didn't say, was dangerous. Time for you to decide what you want to become next." He turned for the door. Clara stepped into his path. "What do you want, Wyatt?" He paused. The lamplight cut across the scar on his face, sharp as split stone. I want Crow to remember fear, he said. I want him to learn there's a price to every lie he buys. But I can't do it alone. The law's in his pocket. The town's too afraid. He looked at her again. They'll stand behind a widow with a name, especially if she's more than just something to be pitied. Clara's mouth tightened. You think they'll follow me? I think you've lost more than most, and you're still standing, Wyatt said. That matters. She stepped aside, letting him pass. As he reached the door, a drunk slumped in the corner, pushed himself upright, eyes glazed. Hey, he slurred. Ain't you Wyatt Cole? The saloon fell silent. Wyatt didn't turn. Depends who's asking. The drunk staggered closer. I heard you got cut down in El Paso, left to bleed outside a burning church. Wyatt's voice dropped cold and flat. You heard wrong. The man hesitated, then lunged. Steel flashed for a heartbeat. Wyatt moved faster. In a single motion, he twisted the man's wrist, stripped the knife free, and slammed the blade into the tabletop between the man's fingers. No blood spilled, but no one breathed. The room held still. Wyatt swept his gaze across the saloon drifters, then looked back to Clara. At first light, he said, You and I talk somewhere quiet. There's more at stake here than horses and stories. She didn't answer as he stepped into the night. The door swung shut behind him. Later, back in her house, 2 rooms and a roof that sang when the wind rose, Clara didn't sleep. She sat by the window with her father's old rifle laid across her knees. Clara's children slept, huddled in the corner, unaware that their mother's name now carried the weight of another man's shadow, and that by dawn, nothing in Rust Hollow would remain untouched. She didn't trust him. She didn't pretend to understand him. But for the first time since her husband's death, Silas Crow no longer seemed untouchable, and that alone carried weight. They met at first light, where red stone bluffs clawed up into the sky like broken knuckles. Clara Hale had left Clara's children with Martha Bell, telling her she needed to settle matters at the courthouse. She said nothing about the rifle hidden beneath her coat or the knife pressed against her boot. Wyatt Cole was already there, sitting on a flat slab of stone, eyes fixed on the horizon as if it might offer a confession. You came, he said without turning. I didn't come for you, Clara answered. He nodded as though he respected the lie. The wind pulled at her skirts sharp and dry. From that height, Rust Hollow looked small, a dull smear between raw earth and open sky. Far enough from Crow's eyes to speak plainly. I didn't kill your husband, Wyatt said. I know, Clara replied. He finally looked at her. The scar on his face didn't strike as hard now. She saw the man beneath it, older than he appeared, steadier than anyone she'd known since the war ended. What I don't understand, she said, is why you think this ends well. Crow has 30 hired men. Most of them drunk, all of them armed. Sheriff Tom Calder owes him land. Judge Amos Reed owes him silence. Everyone else owes him their lives. Wyatt reached into his coat and tossed something onto the stone between them. A silver badge scarred, dulled, worn thin by time. U.S. Marshal, he said. Or I was, until I refused to burn a mining town for a railroad syndicate. They called it desertion. I called it conscience. Clara studied the badge, then looked back at him. You think a title still matters out here, no, Wyatt said. But a name does. Cole still carries weight in these parts. If I strike Crow, they'll call it a vendetta. He met her eyes. If you do, they'll call it justice. She stepped closer. Why me? Because you already are what they wish they were, he said. A widow who didn't bend, didn't run. They'll follow you if you lead. But first they need to see Crow bleed. She didn't like it, didn't like how easily the idea took root. But Crow had sent men to threaten her land, leaned on the banker to choke her loan, nearly had her hanged for saving 2 starving horses. He crushed everyone the same way. "You're sure they'll follow?" she asked. "I'm sure they'll watch," Wyatt said. "Sometimes that's enough." That night, they laid the trap. Clara rode alone toward Crow's northern paddock, under a moon pale as bone. A lantern swung from her saddle, slow and deliberate. She wore her husband's old coat, patched familiar just enough to mark her at a distance. 2 of Crow's riders waited by the split-rail fence, half drunk and barely awake. "Thought I might try stealing a few more," Clara called. One man lifted his rifle. The other laughed. "You've got nerve," he slurred. "I'll give you that." From the bluffs behind them, a low whistle cut through the dark. Wyatt moved like smoke. By the time they turned, he was already there, silent, fast, merciless. He didn't kill. Not yet. One man went down cold. The other lost his rifle and found himself tied hard to the fence. "Still clean?" Clara asked. "For now," Wyatt said. They left the men where Sheriff Tom Calder would find them by morning. The message didn't need explaining. It was never going to end quietly. At first light, Silas Crow rode onto her land with 4 mounted men. Crow's riders spread wide behind him, Sheriff Tom Calder trailing close like a reluctant shadow. Crow skipped pleasantries entirely. "You think you're clever, Clara," he called out. "Sending yourself a fresh husband to snoop around my property." Clara Hale stepped out onto the hard-packed dirt, her rifle resting at her side barrel, lowered, but ready. "You crossed my land first," she said. "Called me a thief. Sent your men to torch my field last spring." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You just never thought anyone would push back." Crow smiled, but his eyes stayed sharp and measuring. "This is your warning," he said. "Next time I won't bring the law. I'll bring fire." That was when Wyatt Cole stepped out from the barn, calm as a man walking into shade. "You already tried fire," he said evenly. "Didn't stick." The sheriff glanced between them, sweat darkening his collar. "Now hold on, no, Clara, cut in." She turned on him, voice firm. "You hold on. I want a jury trial. For the horses, for the arson, for the threats. I want it public." Crow laughed short and sharp. "You're wasting breath. Ain't no jury out here but the one I choose." "Then let's see who they fear more," Clara said. Wyatt's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. It was enough. By sundown, Rust Hollow was humming. Folks who hadn't dared speak above a whisper in years were suddenly talking. And when word spread that Clara Hale would bring charges before the territorial judge himself, riding in from the capital within 4 days, eyes shifted toward Crow, no longer with awe, but calculation. The bluff had worked. Now came the danger of holding it. That night, Clara stood at her window watching the stars burn cold and distant. Wyatt sat outside, rifle laid across his knees. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. They both knew Crow wouldn't wait 4 days. The day before the judge's arrival, a dust storm rolled in from the west, swallowing the sky in rust and ash. The kind of omen Rust Hollow folk didn't name, only watched through shuttered windows. Clara didn't stay inside. She stood in the middle of the street, eyes narrowed against the grit, while Wyatt drove the final brace into the church doors. They weren't sealing it against wind alone. By dusk, word spread that Crow's riders had cleared the saloon and loaded their rifles. There would be no trial, no speeches. Crow had no use for verdicts he didn't write himself. Inside the church, Wyatt lit a single lantern. "He's coming tonight," he said quietly. "He'll dress it up like a raid. Blame bandits." Or, Comanche Clara said, "Then it's finished." She nodded. Her hands didn't shake. Then we don't wait. They took their positions inside the old chapel pews, stripped away shadows, deep and ready. Wyatt had turned the place into a snare, narrow doors, tight lines of sight sandbags stacked beneath the windows. Clara's children were already gone, sent at dawn with Martha Bell's wagon to the next town. That was the only demand Clara had made. Wyatt watched as she checked the rounds in her husband's rifle. "You still have a choice," he said. "If you walk away now, no one would blame you." She closed the chamber, slung the strap over her shoulder, and met his gaze without blinking. "I made my choice when they tied my name to a lie," she said, "and left me to hang for it." They waited in stillness. It didn't last. The first shot split the night at midnight, clean, deliberate. Then came the roar. 6 riders burst through the dust, and smoke guns raised voices lifted like wolves on the hunt. They came for fear more than blood. They found neither. Wyatt Cole dropped the first man before his boots even struck the ground. Clara Hale fired a heartbeat later, her round hammering the second rider square in the chest and pitching him beneath his horse. The third made it to the church steps screaming until Clara stepped forward, slowed her breath, and took him down with a shot to the thigh. She didn't kill, not unless there was no other choice. Then the fire came. A bottle crashed through the window glass, exploding across the altar as flame crawled along the floor. Wyatt smothered it with his coat, choking on smoke. "Back door," he shouted. They moved together out the rear down the narrow way behind Owen Pike's shop, slipping into shadows where the street lamps failed. Wyatt laid cover from behind a stack of barrels while Clara sprinted for the sheriff's office. She kicked the door open. Sheriff Tom Calder sat frozen pistol in hand, eyes blown wide, but he didn't lift it. "Crows burning the town," Clara said. "If that fire touches another house, it's on you." He faltered, pale and sweating. "You don't understand, Mrs. Hale. He'll kill me." "No," she said evenly. "We will if you don't walk outside right now and do your job." The silence stretched thin as wire. Then the sheriff rose slowly. By the time they reached the church again, the Rust Hollow folk had gathered. Not armed, not brave, just present faces flickering in the dark, caught between terror and something else. Hope, maybe. Silas Crow rode through the smoke with 6 men flanking him. His coat hung open, vest dark with blood, his face set like stone. "You had your chance, Clara," he called. "You could have walked away. Instead, you dragged ghosts into it." Wyatt stepped out of the shadows, rifle laid easy across his chest. "She didn't drag me," he said. "I walked." Crow laughed brittle and sharp. "You think one woman and one dead man can stop me. I think one town might." Wyatt said, "If they remember how." Crow's gaze swept the crowd. "You think I won't bury every one of you? No?" Clara answered. "We think you already have one lie at a time." She lifted her rifle. It wasn't a call to war. It was a reckoning. Owen Pike stepped forward, first hammer in hand. Then Samuel Wright, apron still dusted with flour. Then Eliza Moore, Lucas Grant, and the preacher's grown daughter, her shotgun half rusted from neglect. Crow's grin collapsed. "You going to shoot a church full of women and children?" Wyatt Cole asked. Crow drew, fast but not fast enough. The shot cracked before anyone else moved. Crow's gun skittered across the dirt, his hand bleeding and useless. Clara stood her ground rifle smoking. She hadn't aimed to kill. She didn't need to. The story would travel faster than the bullet. Crow's riders hesitated a single missed step between orders and fear. The town held. By morning, Judge Amos Reed rode in mustache, gray robe, creased from the road expecting whispers. Instead, he found Clara Hale standing at the church doors beside the U.S. Marshall's badge Wyatt Cole had pinned there for all to see. "We held court last night," Clara Hale told him. "Hope you don't take offense." Judge Amos Reed took in the scene, the blackened timbers, the ash still warm underfoot, the Rust Hollow folk standing quiet and unarmed. His eyes settled on Silas Crow, bound to his own saddle, staring down at the dirt like it might swallow him whole. The judge dipped his chin once. "I reckon that'll do for justice." Clara never took the name Cole. She never needed to. Rust Hollow knew exactly who she was without it. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process, but every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.